The Exilarian Empire had been conquering planets for centuries, spreading their dominance across hundreds of star systems. They had never encountered a species that could challenge their might. To them, the galaxy was theirs to rule, and any world that resisted would quickly be crushed. When their scouts first reported on a newly discovered system, Sol, they barely took notice. The human species, according to the data, was still in its early stages of space exploration. They had just begun to leave their home planet, Earth, and Exilarians believed they were no different from the countless weak civilizations they had encountered before. Small ships, primitive technology, and no real military strength. Surely, the humans would be easy to intimidate. The Exilarian fleet, led by Admiral Colrex, was massive. Hundreds of ships armed with the most advanced weaponry in the galaxy, equipped with shield technology and firepower capable of wiping out entire civilizations. The humans, in their eyes, were no more than ants to be crushed underfoot. The Exilarians didn't expect much resistance. The fleet's approach to the Sol system was silent, but the humans detected them almost immediately. Earth's advanced satellite network picked up strange signals. Military experts across the globe began to monitor the unknown ships entering their space. In the midst of this confusion, the human government made a decision. They would not hide in fear or surrender. Instead, they would send a clear message. The humans were not like the others the Exilarians had conquered. The humans were willing to fight, even against a force far greater than them. President Elena Carter, who had been leading the United Earth Defense Council, stood before the world's leaders, calm yet resolute. "We are not afraid," she said. "We have always faced challenges head-on, and we will not let ourselves be bullied by an alien empire. We give them a warning. Leave our system or face consequences." The message was broadcast across all human channels, a declaration of resistance that would spread across Earth and into the stars. It was short and simple, but powerful. "We are humanity. Leave now, or we will show you what happens when you underestimate us." Meanwhile, on the Exilarian flagship, Admiral Colrex was not impressed. "This is laughable," he said with a sneer, looking at the message on his display screen. "A species that just left their planet dares to challenge us." He waved it off. "This will be an easy conquest. They will bow to us as all others have." The Admiral ordered his fleet to move forward, passing the outer edges of the Sol system. The humans had shown defiance, but Colrex believed that no amount of resistance could stop the might of the Exilarian Empire. As the fleet approached, the humans scrambled. They were not prepared for a battle on this scale, but they knew they had no choice. The Earth's military forces, though not as advanced as the Exilarians, had one advantage: their willingness to innovate and fight with every ounce of strength they had. The human fleet, though small compared to the Exilarians, was ready for a fight. It wasn't just the size of the fleet or the strength of their ships that would define this battle. It was the human spirit. And even though the Exilarians believed they were facing an easy victory, they would soon discover that humanity's strength didn't lie in numbers or firepower. It lay in something far stronger: the will to survive. The first human ships moved into position between the Exilarians and the Earth. They were outmatched, but they would not go down without a fight. Across Earth, the entire world watched in suspense. The battle for the future of humanity had begun, and the first shots were about to be fired. As the Exilarian ships loomed closer, the humans made their first move. They didn't wait for the Empire to strike. With calculated precision, they launched their own warning shot, a flare of light that sent a clear message to the Exilarians: "We will not surrender." And with that, the battle began. The Exilarian fleet advanced steadily toward Earth, confident in their victory. Admiral Colrex stood at the helm of his flagship, his mind already picturing the moment when the human leaders would kneel before him. This would be yet another easy conquest, he thought. A few weak ships wouldn't stand in the way of the Empire's might. But as his fleet closed in on the edge of Earth's atmosphere, something unexpected happened. The human ships, though small and seemingly outgunned, began to move in strange, unpredictable patterns. The Xelarians had expected the humans to cower, to beg for mercy. But instead, they fought back with a defiance that Colrex didn't anticipate. The first shots were fired not by the Xelarians, but by the humans. A single human ship, one of the smaller vessels, fired a barrage of energy blasts toward the lead Xelarian cruiser. The shots were not aimed to destroy, but to send a message. We will not be intimidated. Colrex scoffed at the move. Foolish, he muttered. They waste their ammunition. But something about that first move changed the tone of the encounter. The Xelarian fleet had expected the humans to be easily scared, easily defeated. But the attack showed one thing: humanity would not back down. As the Xelarians began to return fire, the humans proved their resilience. While their ships lacked the powerful shields of the Xelarian fleet, they made up for it with agility. Human ships darted and weaved in unpredictable formations, avoiding blasts with sharp, sudden turns. The Xelarians were used to facing opponents that followed predictable patterns, but the humans were different. They didn't fight with the precision of the Empire's armies, but they fought with the tenacity of a species that had never known surrender. On Earth, the news broadcast every moment of the battle. People from every nation watched in awe as the human ships held their ground against the Xelarians. It was clear: the humans were not giving up without a fight. One of the human commanders, Captain Sarah Marshall, was aboard a ship called Valor. It was a small, fast vessel, equipped with the best technology humanity had to offer. Her team of engineers had worked tirelessly to improve the ship's engines and weapons, but there was one thing they couldn't manufacture: experience. They hadn't fought a battle on this scale before, and yet, when the first shot was fired, Marshall knew that humanity's survival depended on their resolve. "Hold steady, everyone," she said to her crew. "We're not going to win this by firepower alone. We'll win by being smarter." The human ships used every tactic they could think of. They moved in small groups, focusing their fire on specific targets, disrupting the Xelarian formations. They deployed decoys, small drones that confused the Xelarian targeting systems. They didn't have the luxury of overwhelming numbers, but they had something that Xelarians didn't: the ability to think outside the box. In the midst of the chaos, the first human victory occurred. A Xelarian destroyer, once thought to be invincible, was disabled by a well-placed hit from the Valor. The Xelarian ship, unable to maintain its position, began to drift off course. The humans had scored their first major victory in the battle, a symbol of their unyielding spirit. Admiral Colrex watched in disbelief as his flagship's sensors showed that one of his ships had been taken out. "Impossible," he muttered. He had underestimated the humans. Their tactics were unlike anything the Xelarians had seen before. The humans didn't fight like the other species he had conquered. They didn't give up, even when it seemed hopeless. And now, the battle was no longer one-sided. In response, the Xelarians shifted their strategy, launching more devastating attacks, hoping to overwhelm the humans with sheer force. The space around Earth was filled with flashes of energy and the sound of distant explosions as the two sides clashed. But the humans weren't ready to give in. The Valor, though battered, continued to fight, along with the rest of the fleet. They may have been outgunned, but their spirit remained unbroken. Back on Earth, people gathered in cities, holding their breath as they watched the battle unfold. Some felt fear, but most felt pride. The humans were fighting for their home, for their future, and they were doing it with everything they had. Despite the overwhelming odds, despite the size of the Xelarian fleet, the humans didn't back down. They sent a clear message to the Empire: "We are not easy prey. We fight for what we love." The first shots had been fired, and the battle had only just begun. As the battle raged on, the Xelarian fleet grew more furious. Admiral Colrex's pride had been wounded. He had expected to overwhelm the humans quickly, but instead, the humans' unpredictable tactics were causing trouble. The smaller human ships, especially the Valor, continued to outmaneuver the Xilarian fleet with surprising speed and agility. The Xilarians had underestimated the human ability to adapt, and now they were paying the price. Admiral Colrex stood on the bridge of his flagship, his face twisted in frustration. "How are they doing this?" he growled. "We have them outnumbered. We have superior technology, yet they continue to fight back." His officers reported more damage to the fleet. Several Xilarian cruisers had sustained hits, their shields weakening with each strike. The humans had found a way to exploit the smallest weakness in their ships, just enough to disable them, without completely destroying them. Meanwhile, the humans, though struggling with limited resources, were not giving up. They had already lost several ships, but they kept fighting, each small victory lifting their morale. Captain Sarah Marshall, aboard the Valor, looked out at the vast emptiness of space, filled with chaos and flashing lights. Her crew was working hard to keep the ship in one piece, but they needed a new plan. The battle was at a standstill, and they couldn't continue relying on sheer agility alone. "All right, team," Captain Marshall said, her voice steady but determined. "We can't keep this up. We need a plan that will turn the tide in our favor. We're fighting smart, but we need something more." She turned to her tactical officer, Lieutenant Jason Lee. "We need to disrupt their command structure. If we can take out their flagship, we might cause enough confusion to break their formation." Jason nodded. "If we can get close enough, we can make a precision strike. But their defenses are incredibly strong. It will be tough to penetrate." Captain Marshall thought for a moment, then made a decision. "We don't need to penetrate their defenses. We just need to make them think we're targeting their flagship, when in reality, we're going after something else entirely." Her idea was risky, but it was the best chance they had. The human fleet had already proven that they could be unpredictable, and now they would use that to their advantage. They would create a distraction so powerful that the Xilarians wouldn't know what to focus on. Marshall's plan was simple but effective. The human ships would simulate a direct attack on the Xilarian flagship, using a combination of decoys, false transmissions, and a barrage of feigned weapon fire. The goal wasn't to destroy the flagship, it was to confuse and misdirect the Xilarian forces, leading them into a trap. The Valor would stay behind the front lines, hidden in the shadow of a nearby asteroid field, while a small group of human ships created the illusion of a full-scale assault on the Xilarian command ship. The Xilarians, relying on their advanced sensors and technology, would focus all their attention on the false attack, leaving their weaker ships vulnerable. "Prepare for the diversion," Captain Marshall ordered, "and when the time comes, we strike." The next few minutes were a blur of activity. The human ships maneuvered into position, using the asteroid field for cover. From a distance, it looked like they were preparing to launch an all-out assault. The Xilarian fleet, believing that the humans were desperate, quickly began to concentrate their firepower on the supposed threat. Colrex was watching his fleet's sensors, confident that the humans were falling into his trap. "Continue the fire. Crush their pathetic attempt at resistance," he ordered, completely unaware of the humans' deception. Then, at the precise moment, the humans executed their plan. They launched a flurry of decoys into space, small, fast drones that emitted signals identical to human ships. The Xilarians quickly locked on to the decoys, pulling their attention away from the real threat. And just as planned, the human ships began to shift course, moving toward a cluster of Xilarian destroyers at the outer edge of the fleet. They unleashed a coordinated barrage of missiles, targeting weak points in the Xilarian ship shields. The Xilarians, still focused on the false flagship assault, were caught off guard. One by one, the Xilarian destroyers began to falter. The humans didn't waste ammunition on unnecessary shots. They aimed for strategic points, engines, communication systems, and shield generators. Their goal was not total destruction, but to cripple the fleet's ability to fight back. "Target their engines," Captain Marshall commanded. "Disable as many ships as possible. We don't need to kill them, just slow them down." It worked. Within minutes, several Xilarian ships were immobilized, their once pristine shields failing under the humans' calculated fire. The tide of battle began to shift in humanity's favor, not through sheer force, but through cleverness and strategy. Admiral Colrex watched in horror as his fleet faltered. His ships, once so powerful, were now being picked apart by the humans' ingenuity. "What is happening?" he yelled, slamming his fist on the console. "We are the Empire. How can they be doing this?" The Xilarians were beginning to realize that this fight would not be won through strength alone. The humans had shown them that intelligence, creativity, and determination could be just as powerful as advanced weaponry. And for the first time, the Xilarians wondered if they had miscalculated. The humans had given them a warning, but now it was clear they were in for a much harder fight than they had ever imagined. The Xilarian fleet was in chaos. Admiral Colrex, once so confident in his empire's superiority, now found himself scrambling to regain control. His ships, which had been perfectly coordinated at the start of the battle, were now scattered, their systems damaged, and their morale shattered. The humans had managed to exploit their weaknesses, and it was clear now that the fight was far from over. Colrex stood in the command center of his flagship, his hands clenched into fists. "How could this happen?" he muttered to himself, his voice filled with disbelief. "We are the might of the galaxy, and yet they resist us." His officers were equally shocked, staring at the battlefield's chaotic view. They had expected to crush the humans with ease, but now the human fleet was fighting back with more resolve than anyone could have imagined. For every Xilarian ship disabled, the humans seemed to grow bolder, more determined. It was no longer a question of whether they could win. It was about how much damage they could inflict before the humans forced them to retreat. Meanwhile, Captain Sarah Marshall and her crew aboard the Valor were riding a wave of cautious optimism. They had achieved more than they thought possible, taking down several Xilarian destroyers and causing major damage to their fleet. But the battle was far from over, and they knew that their victory was still uncertain. They had done well to create confusion within the Xilarian ranks, but the enemy was regrouping, and the humans were running out of time. "We've taken down some of their fleet," Marshall said, her voice filled with determination. "But the Xilarians won't give up easily. We need to press on while we still have the advantage." Lieutenant Jason Lee, her tactical officer, nodded in agreement. "We've made them stumble, but we haven't broken them. They'll reorganize, and when they do, they'll come at us with everything they have." Marshall looked over her shoulder, gazing out into the vastness of space. The stars seemed so distant, like tiny pinpricks of light in a cold, unforgiving universe. But beneath the cold there was warmth, humanity's will to survive, to fight for their future. "Then we need a bold move, a final push that will leave them no choice but to retreat." Jason raised an eyebrow. "A bold move, Captain. We don't have the resources for something like that." "We don't need resources. We need courage," Marshall replied, her eyes flashing with resolve. "We're going to strike at the heart of their fleet. We'll make it look like a final assault, something they won't expect. And when we hit them, we'll hit them hard." It was a dangerous plan, but it was the only one they had. They would risk everything to force the Xilarians into a retreat. The humans didn't have the firepower to win a prolonged war, but they had something better: the courage to take risks, the courage to act when others might hesitate. As Marshall's team prepared for the daring strike, Earth's population watched the battle with bated breath. Every moment was tense, every decision critical. The humans had gained some ground, but they needed a victory, something that would send a message not just to the Xilarians, but to the entire galaxy. The human fleet moved into position, forming a tight formation around the Valor. The plan was simple. They would launch a full-on assault, pretending to be ready to sacrifice everything in a final desperate strike. The Xilarians would think the humans were making a last-ditch effort to win, but in reality, it was a distraction. The goal was to bait the Xilarians into focusing all their energy on the attack, while a small group of ships would slip past their defenses and target the Xilarian flagship, the very heart of their command. The humans knew that if they failed, they might not get another chance. But this was their moment, the opportunity to strike a decisive blow and turn the tide of the battle in their favor. And for the first time, they felt like they had a fighting chance. "Get ready," Marshall said, her voice calm but fierce. "This is it. We either make our stand now, or we'll be fighting for nothing." The human ships began their approach, heading straight for the Xilarian fleet. The Xilarians watched, preparing their defenses, thinking they had the humans exactly where they wanted them. But just as the humans expected, their attention was drawn to the attack on the surface, leaving the real target, the flagship, vulnerable. The plan was working. At the crucial moment, a group of human ships darted past the Xilarian defenses, racing toward the flagship with incredible speed. The Xilarians were caught off guard as they realized too late that they had been tricked. "We've got a clear shot," Jason shouted. "Now's the time, Captain." Without hesitation, Captain Marshall gave the order. The human ships unleashed their most powerful weapons at the heart of the Xilarian flagship. The blast was precise and powerful, shaking the Xilarian vessel to its core. Systems failed, shields crumbled, and the once mighty flagship began to lose its grip on the battlefield. The Xilarians were in full retreat. Their flagship was crippled, and the rest of their fleet was in disarray. The humans had done what no one thought possible. They had struck at the heart of the Empire and survived. As the battle began to wind down, Admiral Kalrex stood silently, watching his fleet crumble. His eyes burned with fury, but deep down, he knew this wasn't over. The humans had proven themselves capable of defying the Empire. This battle was only the beginning. And for the humans, it was a moment of triumph. They had proven that, even against impossible odds, they could fight back. But as they celebrated their victory, they knew that the true test was yet to come. The human fleet's victory over the Xilarian flagship sent shockwaves throughout the galaxy. News spread quickly, and humans everywhere felt a surge of pride. It wasn't just a military victory. It was a statement. They had proven that even against a far more advanced enemy, they could stand their ground and fight back. But Captain Sarah Marshall wasn't celebrating. The battle was over for now, but she knew that the war was far from won. The Xilarians were a powerful enemy, and they wouldn't take their defeat lightly. The Valor moved to a secure location, the crew exhausted but determined. Their mission had succeeded, but it had come at a cost. Several ships had been severely damaged, and many of their allies had fallen in the battle. As Marshall sat in her command chair, she couldn't help but think about the lives lost and the immense responsibility that rested on her shoulders. Lieutenant Jason Lee entered the bridge, a concerned look on his face. "Captain, we've received new intel from our spies. The Xilarians are regrouping. They've sent for reinforcements from the outer colonies." Marshall nodded grimly. "I expected this. The Xilarians won't let one loss stop them. They'll come at us harder than ever before." Jason hesitated, then spoke again. "But Captain, what if this is the turning point? What if we can take advantage of their weakness and really push them back?" Marshall stood up, walking over to the view screen. She gazed out at the stars, deep in thought. "We've gained their attention. They'll be cautious now, maybe even fearful. But we can't let our guard down. We need to prepare for the next phase of the war." The entire crew was on edge. They knew that the Xilarians would be back with more strength, more ships, and more firepower. The humans had won a battle, but they hadn't won the war. The real challenge lay ahead. Days passed, and the human fleet began to rebuild. The damage to the ships was being repaired as best as they could, but there were still many unanswered questions. Would the Xilarians strike quickly, or would they pull back to reassess their strategy? One thing was certain: the humans couldn't afford to sit back and wait. They had to remain proactive, stay ahead of the enemy's movements, and find a way to disrupt the Xilarians before they could regroup fully. On the Valor, Captain Marshall convened a meeting with her senior officers. The war had entered a new phase, and they needed a plan, something bold enough to keep the Excelarians on their toes. "We need to hit them before they have a chance to come together," Marshall said, pacing around the room. "They're vulnerable right now. We have the element of surprise on our side." Lieutenant Commander Rachel O'Neill, the ship's intelligence officer, spoke up. "We've been tracking the movements of their reinforcements. They're still a few days away, but the Excelarians have been sending smaller ships to test our defenses. It's possible they're trying to lure us into a trap." Jason Lee, the tactical officer, folded his arms. "Then we use their tactics against them. We send out decoys, make them think we're vulnerable, and draw them into an ambush." Marshall stopped pacing and turned to face them. "Exactly. We use their confidence against them. The goal isn't just to fight, it's to keep them guessing. Every move we make has to be unpredictable. We have to force them to second-guess their every decision." It was a risky plan, but it was the kind of bold move the humans needed. They couldn't just wait for the Excelarians to attack again. They had to take the initiative and keep the pressure on. The days leading up to the next confrontation were tense. The human fleet moved into position, spreading out across the galaxy to create a false impression of their strength. Some ships were positioned in quiet sectors, ready to strike if the Excelarians showed their hand. Others were hidden, preparing for the moment when the Excelarians would make their move. The crew of the Valor was ready. They knew this battle could define the entire war. If they succeeded, they would have the upper hand. If they failed, they could be facing a long, brutal fight for survival. The first signs of the Excelarians' approach came through their long-range sensors. A fleet, much larger than the humans had anticipated, was heading toward their location. It was clear that the Excelarians weren't just coming for a simple skirmish. They were ready for all-out war. Marshall's voice rang out across the comms. "All ships, prepare for battle. We've played our part. Now it's time to finish this." The human fleet mobilized, ready to face the Excelarians once again. The first wave of ships arrived, smaller craft designed to probe the human defenses. The humans held their fire, waiting for the Excelarians to commit. As expected, the Excelarians took the bait. With one swift move, the human ships ambushed the Excelarian forces, catching them off guard and dealing significant damage to their scouting ships. The humans had succeeded in drawing the Excelarians into a trap, but the battle was far from over. The Excelarians were not easily defeated, and now the real fight was beginning. As the battle raged on, Captain Marshall could feel the weight of responsibility on her shoulders. The war was no longer just a matter of survival. It was a fight for humanity's place in the galaxy. The humans had proven their strength once, but they had to do it again. And this time, they had to finish what they had started. The battle had been fierce. The humans had dealt the Excelarians a significant blow, but the enemy was not yet defeated. The Excelarian fleet had regrouped quickly, their commanders hungry for revenge after the loss of their smaller ships. The humans had made a mark, but the Excelarians were not the kind of enemy to back down easily. Captain Sarah Marshall stood on the command deck of the Valor, staring at the star maps. The fleet had been battered, but it wasn't done yet. She could feel the tension in the air. The crew knew this was coming. The final push was near. The Excelarians had started to make their move. They were regrouping, ready to throw everything they had at the humans. "We can't wait for them to come to us," Marshall said quietly. "We need to take the fight to them." Lieutenant Jason Lee, her tactical officer, glanced over his console. They'd been sending smaller patrols, trying to test our defenses, but their main fleet is still assembling. "We have time, but not much." Rachel O'Neill, the intelligence officer, stepped forward. "I've been keeping an eye on their communications. The Excelarians are in disarray. They're overconfident, thinking their size will overwhelm us. But that's their weakness. They don't understand the way we fight." Marshall nodded. "We'll exploit that. If they think we're just a small nuisance, we'll make sure they understand how wrong they are." The humans had proven their mettle in the previous skirmishes, and now they had to take the next step. The Xelarians were regrouping, but the humans couldn't allow them to form their full strength. It was a dangerous mission, but it was the only chance they had. With the fleet readying itself, Captain Marshall began preparing her officers for the next move. They had to strike quickly, hit hard, and keep the pressure on the Xelarians. The advantage was still in the humans' hands, but it was fading. The Xelarians had the numbers, but the humans had the strategy, and they had the heart. "We will need to split our forces," Marshall continued, "and make sure we don't give the Xelarians a chance to regroup. Divide and conquer. It's a dangerous move, but it will work." The officers gathered around the table, listening intently. Each one knew the risks involved. The humans weren't just fighting for survival now. They were fighting for something more. The future of humanity, the chance to prove they could hold their own on the galactic stage, was at stake. Over the next few days, the human fleet began its final preparations. Smaller ships were sent to disrupt Xelarian supply lines, while larger warships moved into position for a direct assault. The humans knew they had to keep the Xelarians from gathering their full forces. They had to strike before the enemy could react. When the day of the battle arrived, the human fleet was ready. The Xelarians had made their move, but they hadn't anticipated the human strategy. The human smaller ships attacked first, disrupting the Xelarians' lines and sowing confusion. The Xelarians were forced to scramble to respond, but they had underestimated how quickly the humans could strike. Captain Marshall watched the battle unfold from the Bridge of the Valor. The Xelarians were regrouping, but the humans were relentless. Every move they made was calculated, every attack well-timed. The humans were like a storm, sweeping through the Xelarians' defenses and making their presence felt. For a moment, the humans appeared to have the upper hand. The Xelarians were on the defensive, struggling to regroup. The humans' success in the initial phase of the battle had given them hope. But then, just as it seemed they were winning, the Xelarians revealed their trump card, a fleet of reinforcements, arriving faster than anyone had expected. The human fleet was caught off guard. For a moment, the battle hung in the balance. The Xelarians had the numbers, and their ships were powerful. It was clear the fight was far from over. But Captain Marshall didn't flinch. She knew that it wasn't just about the size of the fleet. It was about the will to win. "We're not done yet," she said firmly, her voice calm despite the intensity of the battle. "We have to push forward. Stay focused." Lieutenant Lee spoke up, his eyes scanning the battle screens. "They're trying to surround us. We need to break through before they cut us off." Marshall's mind raced. She had to act fast. "All ships, form up and break the encirclement. Push through the center. Take out their command ship. If we can disrupt their leadership, the rest will crumble." The human ships responded immediately. It was a risky maneuver, but they had no choice. The center of the Xelarian fleet was their weak point. The humans would have to break through, no matter the cost. As the humans launched their attack, it was clear the Xelarians hadn't prepared for this level of aggression. The human fleet moved with precision, striking at the heart of the enemy's command structure. The battle became a blur of energy blasts and maneuvers as the humans pressed forward, never once faltering. In the end, it was the human determination that made the difference. The Xelarians, despite their numbers and power, were unable to withstand the relentless pressure. With one final strike, the human fleet cut through their defenses, forcing the Xelarians to retreat. Captain Marshall watched as the Xelarian ships pulled back, their formations breaking apart. The battle was over. The humans had won. But she knew this victory was only a step in a much larger war. The Xelarians were still out there, waiting for their next chance. But for now, the humans had proven something important. They weren't just a nuisance in the galaxy. They were a force to be reckoned with. The final moments of the battle had left Captain Sarah Marshall breathless. The Xelarian fleet, once so sure of its power, was now retreating into the depths of space, broken and battered. The human ships, though damaged, had held their ground. fighting with a resolve the Xelarians had never expected. As the last of the enemy ships vanished into the void, a sense of disbelief swept over the crew of the Valor. "We did it," Lieutenant Jason Lee said, his voice filled with awe. "We actually did it." Marshall stood tall, her gaze focused on the stars ahead. "Yes, we did. But the war is far from over. This is just one victory in a much bigger fight." She knew that the humans had proven themselves in this battle, but the Xelarians were not easily defeated. The battle had been hard, and though they had won, they couldn't let their guard down. The enemy would return, and when they did, the humans would need to be ready. "Captain, we've intercepted their communication channels," Rachel O'Neill, the intelligence officer, said, walking up to Marshall. "They're calling for reinforcements. The Xelarian Empire will not give up so easily." But, Marshall raised an eyebrow. O'Neill smiled. "But they're afraid. Their commanders are panicking. They've never faced an enemy like us before. They thought we were weak. Now they know what we're capable of." Marshall nodded, but her expression was still serious. "We need to make sure they don't recover from this. We can't let them regroup and plan their next attack. Now is the time to strike back." The crew of the Valor gathered in the briefing room, the weight of their victory still sinking in. The humans had fought for their survival, but the war was not yet won. The Xelarians might be defeated in this battle, but the humans couldn't stop now. They had to keep pushing forward. "We'll take the fight to them," Marshall said, her voice resolute. "Our fleet is smaller, but we've shown that we can hold our own. We'll keep hitting their supply lines, disrupt their reinforcements, and push deeper into their territory." Lieutenant Lee, always quick to think on his feet, spoke up. "If we can keep them on the defensive, we might be able to turn this into a war of attrition. They'll eventually be forced to surrender if they can't sustain their war effort." Rachel O'Neill nodded in agreement. "We'll need to keep the pressure on them. If we show them that we're not afraid to fight, that we won't back down, they'll start questioning whether this war is worth it." The plan was set in motion. The human fleet, bruised but determined, began its next phase of the campaign. Small, strategic strikes against the Xelarians' remaining strongholds were carried out. The humans knew they couldn't afford to take the same approach they had with the Xelarian fleet. This time, it was about intelligence, speed, and precision. As the days passed, the Xelarians struggled to adjust. The more the humans hit them, the more their morale faltered. The fear of the unknown, of a race they once thought insignificant, began to gnaw at their confidence. It wasn't just the firepower of the humans that caused the shift. It was their unwillingness to surrender. After weeks of relentless attacks, a final confrontation loomed on the horizon. The humans had pushed deep into Xelarian territory, striking their supply routes, their command centers, and their heart. The Xelarians, exhausted and fractured, were no longer able to mount an effective defense. "We've got them now," Marshall said as she stood on the bridge of the Valor. "The Xelarians won't be able to recover from this. It's over." But even as the enemy began to crumble, the humans knew they could not afford to underestimate them. The Xelarians, while weakened, still had the potential for destruction. They had to finish the war on their terms, without giving the enemy a chance to retaliate. In the final days of the campaign, the Xelarian High Command issued a desperate plea for peace. The humans had won, but they were not blind to the consequences of prolonged war. The destruction, the loss of life on both sides, had been significant, and although the Xelarians had never expected it, the humans were willing to offer a solution that could bring an end to the bloodshed. "We're not interested in domination," Marshall said in the peace negotiations. "What we want is to be recognized as equals. We've shown you what we're capable of, but we also believe in peace. We don't want more fighting. We just want to be treated fairly." The Xelarians, for the first time, looked at the humans with a mixture of respect and wariness. The galaxy was changing, and they realized that the humans were not the small, weak species they had once fought. They were strong, capable, and determined, traits that would not be ignored. After tense discussions, the Xelarian Empire finally agreed to peace. The war was over, but the humans had earned something more important than victory. They had earned respect. The humans had proven themselves in battle and beyond. They had shown the galaxy that they were not just survivors, but fighters with the courage to stand against even the most powerful forces. Captain Sarah Marshall looked out at the stars, a calm settling over her. The battle was won, and the future of humanity was no longer in doubt. They had not only survived, but had become a force the galaxy would never forget. As the human fleet returned to their homeworld, they knew one thing for sure. The galaxy would remember the day when the Galactic Empire met humans in battle for the first time, and they would remember that humanity gave them a warning.